Wrapping a man up in saran wrap like a mummy and gluing boots on his feet, not something you hear about often. But what if I tell you some people pay for that to explore their own fetishes? However, that kinky sex act left a man dead. Now the OnlyFans model he hired to engage in the sex acts is charged with his murder. I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. Now before we get into this case, I want to tell you about something really exciting at Law&Crime. We're launching a new channel called Scandal that is dedicated to exposing the dark side of fame, covering all the wild crimes in Hollywood and diving into the disturbing rumors floating around celebrity circles. Now, to stay up to date on all the latest celebrity scandals, click the link in the description of this video and subscribe to Scandal today. Now back to this story. So the spicy content creator's attorney denies that she intended to kill him, but police say while the man was unresponsive, she kept on filming for her OnlyFans. So this happened back in April of 2023. But let's take you back a month earlier. That's when 55-year-old Michael Dale first contacted 31-year-old Michaela Rylaarsdam. Police say he spotted her on a website usually used for hiring escorts and spicy dancers, i.e. strippers. Investigators say Michael had an interesting request for Michaela. He wanted her to wrap him up in saran wrap like a mummy and glue women's boots to his feet. Like I said, interesting request. Michaela reportedly said to police that it was the first time she ever engaged in, well, I guess you can put it as fetish behavior. The two met up on April 17th of that same year. Now, their encounter was reportedly between two consenting adults engaging in bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, and masochism. You know, BDSM. That night around 6 p.m., Michaela went over to Michael's home. Michaela told investigators Michael appeared intoxicated, but they still engaged in their tryst. And she spent several hours with Michael and played out his fetish at his request. Again, as long as it's two consenting adults, what's the harm, right? Well, it was fine until a 911 call came in. When officers arrived, Michaela was performing CPR on Michael. He was rushed to the hospital, but declared brain dead the next day. A few days later, he was taken off life support. His cause of death? Deprivation of oxygen to the brain, meaning police think he suffocated to death. But here's the thing. It's not like Michaela was arrested then and there. However, she did cooperate with the investigation. Police say she handed over her phone, but what detectives saw was troubling, as they noted it. On her phone, police say that there were videos of Michael struggling to breathe. He had duct tape over his mouth, a plastic bag over his head, more saran wrap, then duct tape over his face and head. Police say his wrists were bound, his fingers were covered in duct tape, his legs were wrapped in plastic, and police say he was unable to remove the bag or wrappings that were over his head. It's pretty horrifying to think about. And there's more. Now, police say while he was laying there unresponsive, Michaela allegedly kept on filming content for her OnlyFans. Police say she filmed herself performing a sex act nearby, but didn't lay into what exactly it was. They say the footage was shot just moments before she called 911, but police say Michaela denied putting the bag over Michael's head. During their investigation, they learned more, like that Michael paid Michaela $11,000 to have conversations with him and to come up to his house, tie him up, and perform other bondage acts with him. Michael's roommate reportedly told police he saw Michaela super freaked out. His roommate told police he saw Michael on the floor in his sweatpants wrapped in saran wrap from his hips down. Prosecutors say while the evidence shows Michael hired her to perform bondage and fetish acts, there's no indication he asked Michaela to obstruct his breathing or put tape over his mouth or a plastic bag over his head. But Michaela's attorney says that there was no intent to kill him and no attempt to cover up what happened. According to the Orange County Register, her attorney also questioned Michael's cause of death, pointing to the combination of alcohol and a prescription drug in his system. So what happens next? Well, trial. Michaela was arrested last month. The mom of three was charged with second-degree murder and pleaded not guilty to her charges. Ultimately, it'll be up to a jury to decide whether or not Michaela is guilty or not guilty of second-degree murder, but let's bring on attorney Melba Pearson to get her take on this case. Melba, always great to see you. With what we know now, do you see a jury coming back and saying guilty on second-degree murder in this case?
Well, always great to see you and to be on with you. And I don't see this as a second degree murder case. I think because of the salacious nature, everybody's like, oh my gosh. But we also have to look at the intent aspect. And because when the defendant turned over her phone and all the different correspondence that had occurred between her and the victim, it was very clear that they mutually agreed to these activities. He actually wanted her to do more than she actually did. And so with that mindset in kind of in play, I don't see the requisite intent for second-degree murder. Granted, there was wanton and reckless disregard for human life in some ways, but again, that's mitigated by the fact that they mutually engaged in something that could result in death. So they both engaged in very risky behavior. Of course, she should have responded when she saw that he had unfortunately lost consciousness, and probably should have handled that differently, but not to go down the rabbit hole because it's not exactly my area of expertise. But when it comes to the BDSM lifestyle, you have to know what you're doing because of the fact that one wrong move could result in someone's death. So I see negligence on her part because she was not aware of the rules and have a safe word and all those types of things that preserve life when engaging in such, risky behavior.
A huge thank you to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law & Crime YouTube takeover. Morgan & Morgan is a firm with more than 1,000 attorneys because they win a lot. Now, in the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $9.3 million verdict for a car crash in Florida, a $5.6 million verdict for another car accident victim in Atlanta, not to mention $1.8 million in Kentucky after insurance offered them a mere $5,000 in that case. Now, even if you think your case isn't worth millions, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Now, you can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're hurt, visit forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover, click the link below, or scan the QR code you see on your screen. And it's interesting you bring that part up as well, too, because, reading through the reports of this case, she admitted to police that this was kind of her first time acting in this kind of fetish behavior in a way, and particularly in this kind of encounter with this type of request. So with that being said, it did feel like maybe she didn't know exactly what she was doing, or even the risk kind of imposed in kind of carrying that out. So are you surprised, or I know you are surprised that she is charged with second-degree murder, but why do you think it was second-degree murder as opposed to a lesser charge, maybe manslaughter?
I think, again, the salacious nature of it really, I think, hit everybody incorrectly. And again, if you are not, again, this is not my jam, so I'm going to keep using this as a caveat. But, if you do some research in the BDM lifestyle, there are certain societal norms that are, again, we may not understand because that may not something we engage in on a day-to-day basis. But if you were to research that, there are a lot of aspects to which, again, you engage in behavior that could result in death, and you have a safe word, and there's just certain protocols that are followed. And so I know it may be distasteful to some, but again, to understand the totality of the circumstances, any good defense attorney is going to blast a hole in that. Just realistically speaking, because again, you're looking at the consent aspect and you're looking at the negligence aspect, because she walked into a situation that she kind of thought she knew what the rules were, but she really didn't. And so this is a cautionary tale for those who engage in that lifestyle to understand the parameters and how to keep yourself safe, as well as your partner, whoever you're engaging that behavior with, safe. But on its surface, without any background or understanding of this lifestyle, you're like, well, you saw the person passed out, they're not responding. How come you didn't immediately rip the bag off and, do all of the normal things one would think of? But again, when you're in the fetish lifestyle, that's not necessarily the reaction one has. So that's kind of the rub.
Yeah, and just thinking of the imagery here, where we're talking about lots of saran wrap, a lot of clinging wrap, as police have put it, a bag over your head, your fingers are duct tape, your mouth is duct tape. And while the victim did want this, while these were two consenting adults, and we do kind of want to stress that here to our viewers, but what are your just thoughts overall, just about kind of the horrific nature and just the way that the victim kind of became unresponsive, again, with the duct tape over his mouth, the plastic bag over his head, saran wrap just all over his body. Again, while he did want that to happen, what are your thoughts on just how horrific everything turned?
Well, first off, let's be clear. While he did consent to all of this, when the defendant arrived, he was under the influence of some kind of intoxicant. So again, he was not necessarily thinking and operating clearly in terms of what he was necessarily consenting to at that moment. And again, it's one of those things where fantasy and reality don't really match up, right? Because he's fantasizing about all these things and what it would feel like, but then the reality means you stop breathing for a prolonged amount of time. And it makes it difficult for someone to rip that amount of duct tape or plastic off in a timely manner to preserve your life. So I think, again, it was a lack of understanding on both of their parts and a lack of really thinking this through in a lot of ways. And it's tragic. It's tragic. Clearly, he's, again, he was somebody who was he engaged in this for a good time. I mean, this again, and this may be strange to many of us, but some people derive pleasure from those sorts of activities, and that's what he was seeking. And unfortunately, it resulted in his demise, which is incredibly tragic for him and all those who knew him and loved him.
Yeah, and I remember actually just watching a TV series called Nip Tuck, if people are familiar with that show, that they kind of had a plot line exactly similar to this case. This is why it's so interesting and kind of fascinating here. When we're talking about the defense, what do you think that the defense could be for trial? Now, Michaela's attorney says that consent might be a mitigating factor, but not a defense. But she called 911, she performed CPR on him. But what are your thoughts overall on what a trial could look like in defending the client here?
Well, first off, I would want to avoid a trial. Because again of the salacious nature of everything we're dealing with, and you're going to have to educate the jury because they can't quite come to a verdict until they fully understand, again, why someone would even want to engage in this. Most of us wouldn't willingly want to have our faces duct taped. So you have to kind of get the jury past that initial shock and potential prejudice they may have, being like, well, something must be wrong with you, or you're gross and disgusting, or, that sort of thing. So again, I could see a jury just getting caught up in the tawdry part of it and not really focusing on the law. So that cuts both ways for both the prosecution and the defense. So this is something that needs to be a plea, first and foremost. But if this did go to trial, then again, the defense would have to take that step of educating the jury on the BDSM lifestyle, possibly even calling an expert witness to talk about the norms within that community. And then again, looking at the fact of the action she did take, that when she realized there was a problem, she immediately sprang into action, showing that she had no intention of, harming him in some way. And like I said, the argument can be made for negligence, but I don't see second degree murder in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and just
So
going off of the whole negligence part here, investigators say that Michaela kept filming content for her OnlyFans page even while the victim was lying there unresponsive. Do you think it is possible she just didn't realize he was unresponsive and maybe just thought he was just kind of going along with the act? And my second part to that question is, how particularly damaging are those videos that she had turned over to investigators that were found on her phone of her just kind of performing? We don't know exactly what she was doing for her OnlyFans, but as far as, filming content while the victim just lay there unresponsive, not knowing just how particularly bad it was at that time.
Well, of course, those videos are going to come across as harsh and uncaring, and obviously can be easily construed to show a state of mind that was just evil intent, right? So you can see, again, if you're taking the BDSM aspect out of it altogether, in a normal set of circumstances, this is textbook second degree murder. Right, because of the fact that you saw somebody unresponsive, you're filming, you're not rendering aid. I mean, you think of sort of like the suitcase homicide, right, where the defendant placed her partner in a suitcase and left him there, and he's begging for his life, and she's like, "Oh, it's just hide and seek." This is a very clearly a different circumstance than to what we saw in that case, but that video was what was very telling to show her state of mind at the time. And so I could see the prosecution using that tape to say, listen, she had wanton and reckless disregard for his life, and she's filming while he's unresponsive. She's doing things that one could argue was pleasurable to her while someone was dying, and that sort of thing. So in a vacuum, it could be very damaging. But again, the flip side is she turned those videos over. It wasn't that the police and law enforcement had to get it as a result of a subpoena. She willingly turned everything over, which shows that she clearly had nothing to hide and that she felt awful about what had occurred, because clearly that's not how she intended for the night to end.
Oh, and just this whole case overall, it happened back in the spring of 2023. Why do you think she wasn't arrested, though, until just last month, now 2025?
There could be a number of reasons why. I mean, I think that number one, there could have been hesitancy, again, looking at the entire fact pattern of this. Possibly law enforcement was doing more research into both of their backgrounds to kind of understand who they were and how they got to this point. It's possible that they spoke to other witnesses, maybe not necessarily obviously witness to what happened, but did the victim engage in BDSM type activities before? Was there somebody else who could say, listen, he asked for this specifically and this is how it ended, or something along those lines? So I think there was a lot of investigation that they were doing around the facts in this case and how it came to be. And they came to the decision that, this was second degree murder.
Yeah, and despite, what the television shows always show, it doesn't happen as quickly all the time when it comes to these types of investigations. And I'm sure even, when it comes to trial, that'll be a little down the line there. Does it come as a shock to you at all that she's being held on no bond in this case? Do you think she should have been given bond? I mean, she's a wife, she's a mom of 3. It doesn't appear that she would necessarily be a flight risk or anything like that. But are you surprised that, given the charge, that she's being held on no bond?
Well, again, in a vacuum, second degree murder charge in most places is a non-bondable offense. So it is not unusual that because of the charge, she's being held no bond. Now, the unique circumstances underlying this case, to me, would speak to a situation where she should get bond, because again, a judge has to make a decision whether or not the person is a flight risk and whether or not they're a danger to the community. And I don't think it's necessarily been established, again, based on the facts that are publicly available, that she is a danger to the community. Again, this was a unique instance and done at someone else's request. And so I think that's a slightly different circumstance than her just doing this just because, again, contrasting with the suitcase case, right? That kind of mindset. So I'm not shocked based on the charge, but again, if I was her attorney, I would have been arguing for her release based on the fact that she has firm ties to the city. She's clearly has children in school, whatever the case may be. She's built a life. And again, this was a unique set of circumstances, not, I just decided to kill this guy because.
Right. And again, going back to what you had said earlier in our discussion, all about intent, again, her defense attorneys argue she had no intent on killing him or anything like that. But, given the circumstances, you can really see it both ways in this case. And I think that's what makes it so interesting, is that you can really see the prosecution's argument, the defense's argument, and just kind of the blurred lines in between. So it'll be fascinating to see kind of where this case goes from here. Melba Pearson, thank you so much for your insight into this case. But I do want to ask you, where do you think the case will go from here? Even though she pleaded not guilty, do you think eventually she may change her mind and maybe prosecutors and her will work out a deal? What do you think will happen in the future with this case?
I think this will be a plea. I'd be very surprised if it goes to trial. If it does go to trial, again, if I was a defense attorney, I'd be looking for a bench trial, which is just a judge. Because again, looking at the nature of everything that the types of evidence that will be viewed, his last moments are going to be very graphically depicted. And again, that's something that can really sway the jury's emotions to the point that they may not be looking at the underlying law. So if it goes to trial, if I was the defense attorney, not telling anybody how to do their job, but if it was me, I'd be looking for a judge and a judge alone. I would not want to put 6 or 12 people to make this decision.
Yeah, and you're really rolling the dice, especially, if it were to turn into a jury trial. I guess we'll see where this case continues to go and how it unfolds from here. Melba, again, thank you so much for your insight. I always appreciate your time, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Michaela Rylaarsdam has been denied bail and currently remains in jail. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.